Someone can hear me, let me know. That would be great. My screen looks a little different this morning, so it's got me all confused. I'm not the best with technology. Either way, we'll get ourselves going here this morning. And last time we sort of started out talking about, thanks guys for letting me know you can hear me, excellent. Not talking to myself, which often happens. In terms of effective presentations, but last time we had a little bit of a discussion around some tips and some tricks, which we'll do a little bit more of today. We're going to talk about other things to consider. I think one of the big things we'll do as well is we're going to walk through a couple of scenarios of here's a presentation you might have to give and what you might consider and think about, as well as what stops us. So what is it that stops us literally in our tracks? There are an incredible number of people that get stressed out over giving presentations, whether it's to one person or to 500 people. So we're going to talk about what that looks like, some ideas to think about. Again, everyone's unique, but hopefully you'll walk away with something for that. Now, in terms of effective presentations, just a little quick recap. We talked a little bit about last time about, why are you doing a presentation? What's the actual objective of the presentation? And some of these things might sound pretty obvious, but sometimes when we know a topic really well, sometimes we get too caught up in all the things that we know to present them. I'll just tell you a quick story before I move on. I have had to do how many presentations this week? I guess I've done one all-day session, a half-day session, and I spoke at a conference in the last 7 days. So I'm going to get you to guess which one stressed me out the most. So the all-day session was actually a very difficult one. I ended up only using of the 50 or 60 slides, maybe 5, because there were so many other challenges going on. So that's number 1. Number 2, I spoke for a half day with a leadership team who was struggling in a certain area. So that was for about 3.5 hours. Yes, for the full morning. And then I spoke at a conference for, I think it was slated for 45 minutes, but because I think Lieutenant Governor had to come, I had to cut it a little short, and it popped it back to 30 minutes. So of those 3, which one do you think stressed me out the most? Take a guess. Caitlin nailed it. Conference, yes. So this is how you have to understand your own style of presenting. So when I present, I do lots of things, whether it's at a conference of 1,000 people, so this is like 400 people or something, or whether it's whatever it is, I love to engage the audience. I love to have as much discourse, a little activity, whatever I can do to keep them engaged and get them to walk away with a good nugget. And cutting it back, as much as the shorter ones are almost harder because you have to actually almost be as quick and short and snappy. And as I present, I'm not, as you know, I'm not scripted. So that definitely threw me a little bit. It definitely stressed me out more because I couldn't get enough out because it was a logical progression in my head, how we'd get from point A to point B so people could really get the most value. So absolutely, the conference is the one that stressed me out the most. And you have to understand your own style. And as we walk through some of this today, some of the things are going to be more natural for you, other things less so. So again, me sort of free flow and sort of, knowing that I understand enough about the material, and at the end of the day, I don't need to know everything is my philosophy. But again, everyone's unique in terms of how much they've presented, the experience they have, and their comfort level. So just think about that as well. So in terms of the audience, so there you go. I like to connect with the audience personally. I like to try to make sure it's something that they want. How I connect, I mean, for me personally, if I'm in a big area, I'll walk down through an aisle, or I'll physically get closer, I'll talk to them in certain ways, I'll ask a question and try to, get energy brought up in the room, whatever it takes to get them actually centered to you and connected to you. And how do they get to know you, right? Because at the end of the day, no matter where you're presenting, you could be a great expert in something, but if you can connect with them and they get to know a little bit about you, maybe within the industry or whatever it might be, maybe it's a little story about something or a joke about something, it can actually help connect as well. And again, what are they taking away, right? It's so easy to get caught up in the detail of all the things that we know, and we get so frustrated when we couldn't get things out. But sometimes they don't need to know as much as you think. Sticking to the time. Again, not my strength. As many of you know, sometimes I can barely look at the clock and say, oh my gosh, time's up. So it's not always my strength, although you really sometimes have to think about shorter is better and interactive as well. And we're going to talk about the anxiety piece as well, because, for many of us that do this for many years, we certainly, the anxiety, it depends on the level of anxiety that makes the difference. And we finished up on this as well. So in terms of knowing your audience, Who are they? What are their needs? And how do you actually deliver? So those are the big fundamental questions. And we're going to dig into those a little bit more and have some scenarios around them today. So, what's in it for them? What do they already know? So, and again, what assumptions do we make around that? Sometimes we think, oh, I'm presenting, or I'm talking to a new client in this area, or I'm presenting to a new member of the leadership team, or whatever it might be. Don't make the assumption that they know everything, but you also need, if you can, understand what they do know so you don't repeat things, so you don't lose their attention too quickly. Who are the power makers? Who are the decision makers in the room? Who do you need it so there for? If it's talking about, business, how do you actually change someone's mind? And if there's 30 people in the room, but one of them is the key decision maker, you kind of have to cater a little bit to that, right? As much as blend it with the rest of the group as well. What's the common ground and what's the problem, right? Where do you sort of see alignment? Where do you see where you can overlap, where you can offer a service, or you can help in a certain way, right? And then sometimes there's just some interesting facts and tidbits. It's actually nice for them to know that they wouldn't know in the span of their day. So in terms of being yourself versus adapting, this is a tough one, and I think over time, anyone who speaks a lot or does a lot of presentations, whether it's with clients or more in a more formal conference-type perspective, you have to sort of adapt to your audience to one thing, but you kind of do need to sort of be yourself as well. You need to show a bit of yourself. Now, a lot of people are not as comfortable with that, so you can certainly adapt to the needs of the audience a little bit more, but showing a little bit of authenticity and sort of genuine you, as much as for example, I'm not scripted. So sometimes, even in the conference last week, I looked at the next, I made a joke and I said, I have no idea what slide's coming up because I'm not scripted. And they laughed and we went on and I was like, oh, that's the slide, right? So that was me being myself and being comfortable with that. And guess what? No one judged. Well, there could have been someone judging me, but most of the people laughed and thought it was cute and we went on our merry way. So it was relaxed, right? It didn't sort of stress anyone out. So again, I've learned to do that, but again, how do you be yourself a little bit, but also adapt to their needs? Because if we're just ourselves, I've seen so many people, especially in the academic space, when I used to do some academic conferences when I was publishing odds and sods in my master's years ago. And I remember, them just getting up and speaking, and it was all scripted, and they just did it, and then they did the next one. It was exactly the same. You knew exactly what you're getting from anyone at any point in time, right? So sometimes we need to actually think about our audience in a better way. Or the topic. Is it a new topic? Is it an interesting topic? How can you change and adapt because of it? Now, those of you that did when we talked about assessing people and looking at those workplace relationships, this will look familiar. If not, that's okay. There are different styles of people out there. There are also, we can make some assumptions on certain types of people in certain industries, as an example. So, for example, when I spoke to somebody, I'll explain this in a second, but when I spoke to a group of actuarials, because I used to be involved with a group, and their actuarials highly cerebral and analytical and math-oriented, I kind of had a sense of what I was walking into. Of course, they're all uniquely different, 30 of them or whatever, but they were all uniquely different, but there were some things that I knew. I knew they would need time to process, so they would be a C in this one, the blue. All right, I knew they would need time to process. I sent them things in advance before I gave a talk about something. I made sure they could ask questions in the session, but I also made sure they had my card so they could ask questions later. Okay, so the silences, they want some detail, they want to connect the dots, but they won't naturally do so in the type of world I work in. So again, do you have people as well who are Ds, who are very, the dominant style? So think about if you've been through this with me from the last time, if someone wants to be short and sweet, give them the Coles Notes version, give them the executive summary, here are the 3 bullets. Here are the quick pros and cons of why I'm picking that one and recommending it to you for consideration. They like to make their own decisions, right? So don't be telling them what they need. So especially if you're working with like a head of an organization or a company or head of a household for that matter, if they want to be the decision maker, make sure you give them the decision, offer them options of which they decide. And then you've got your I's and your S's, which are more people-oriented, right? So is there a bit of fun in it? Can you connect with people on a personal level? That'll make all the difference. If you're giving a presentation to people, say, for example, in a sales marketing company, right? Or within a family, a large family maybe, who is really fun. You got to be fun with them. You got to present it in a fun way and find a fun story or something that you can connect with them. And then the patience of an S. Now the S too, for those that may remember, and for those that may not know, S is in this sense the steadies. are least likely to tell you when they don't want your business. So these are the people who are probably quieter. They're the clients who will sort of, or teammates that will step back and they will smile and nod, but at the end of the day, they may choose somebody else, right? So those are the people that you need to ask the questions to, open-ended questions. And if you're doing a presentation, so what would concern you at this moment? Or are there any things that would make you pause? Or what kind of makes this fit for you? You know, so just making sure you ask those questions, right, to really learn more about them, because they're not naturally going to tell you. They're the ones that will say no through not renewing. Okay, so again, you know, how you present to them, one may be very short and sweet, boom, 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 and what do you think, or what do you want to choose? Another one could be very question-oriented, a little bit of information, and maybe some information in advance sent, so they can process the information, especially if they're decision makers. So just from a presentation standpoint, maybe you're out at a conference. What type of conference is it? Okay, so we'll give a scenario shortly, and you can have a look at that. Sorry, am I frozen up here just a second? Okay, so which one do you guys prefer? The slide on the left or the slide on the right? Everyone's uniquely different. Yeah, so we've got some people, yeah, a lot of people are saying on the right. Again, don't make that assumption, but yes, the majority of people would prefer something visual. I was talking to an executive director yesterday about his presentation, and I said, sometimes just a quote or a picture, and he's like, really? You know, and so he's speaking to his board of directors, and I said, sometimes you need to kind of give a visual perspective to kind of like make them think a little differently. So yeah, the visual here can kind of get people jazzed. Ooh, look at the colors, how does it work? And they get connected to the story around the slide, but also the slide itself. So there's a Kawasaki's PowerPoint rule, and if anyone's heard of 10-20-30, I thought I'd share this. I couldn't remember exactly what his name was, but I knew this rule was out there, so I put it in for you guys. So in terms of what you're covering and how many slides you have, okay, oftentimes they have rules of thumb in terms of how many slides. So 10 slides, okay, so if you're speaking for, usually they say, you know, one slide for 3 to 4 minutes, depending what's on the slide, obviously. But having said that, you know, shorter is better. And oftentimes what I do is I have a ton of slides, and because I'm pretty free flow, I'll just pick the ones I need. I'll flip past other ones because I know them pretty well. But having said that, for most folks, they'll say, oh, I've got a deck of, you know, okay, I'm doing a presentation for half an hour and I've got a deck of like 40 or 50 slides. It's like, whoa, right? What are the chances anyone's going to remember all that? So again, they have 10 slides. So cover your big ideas, not 100 mediocre ones. Take some big bang ones. They don't need to know everything on the slides. Guess what? That's what you're there for. In terms of how long you're going to speak. So even when I do sessions, I make sure that I only speak for a certain period of time. So there's an exercise, there's an interactive dialogue. If I'm actually doing like a training portion of around information, sort of an educational teaching section, I'll usually limit it to 15 minutes max. Most people can only hold their attention for 5 to 7 minutes in a presentation. So how do you be short and sweet? Or how do you break it up? For example, when I got cut short on that conference because I had to finish up for someone who was coming, it was frustrating for me because I had an activity I wanted to do that would break up some of the information. So I ended up throwing in a different one altogether, which I wasn't really planning on. So again, right, what is it that you can do even in 20 minutes, not just be regurgitating information for 20 minutes? How do you break those things up? But again, yes, 20 minutes maximum for any sort of teaching component or information giving component. And larger fonts. Now, I don't always do this all the time, and I thank you for your patience with my slides. But fewer words can make it easier. As simple as sometimes that's why I have a picture or a quote or one question on a slide, because sometimes you just need to leave that one piece of information on the slide. The worst thing you can do, which I'm sure I have in here, is have a lot of verbiage on one slide. Okay, so it gets overwhelming, and while they're trying to read and they're probably going on to the next point, you're trying to talk as well, and guess what? You're actually fighting with your slides. So how do you use other things? How do you actually use even videos? Is there a YouTube video, you know, you can access? Not copyrighted, of course, but usually YouTube, it's free flow. But are there graphs? Are there charts? You know, do they fit your audience? Are you someone who, can you go in and jazz up your slides? In PowerPoint, if you haven't used it a lot and you actually are going to be using it, or if you're going to use it on occasion, has some great features now around design ideas. I don't use it that often, but design ideas where you can actually put information down. It'll give you different design options, which can be great if you're not used to doing PowerPoint slides as well. So how do you jazz it up a little bit there? No one ever complained of a presentation being too short, ever. We get caught up in all the information we have. I remember years ago presenting, I can't remember who it was, some senior leadership group when I was working in this one company, and I knew so much information. I tried to jam it all in there. And of course, what happened was it was just information overload. So those major 3 nuggets that I wanted them to know got lost in the mix. And so what I learned is that, look, if I just give them just enough to tease them to ask me questions, or for them to know I'm an expert in this area, or this is what I know really well, here's the 3 or 4 things I need you guys to know. And moving forward, we can have more information for you, or you can call me anytime, or I'm happy to answer any questions now. So when in doubt, shorter is better. And again, have information as well. And also handouts, right? Some people love the handouts, the takeaways, to think something through. It might be just your business card, right? Just so you know, hey, call me anytime, I'll answer any question. We'd love to get your business. In terms of, this is one that's getting into some of the more challenging pieces in terms of what stresses people out. So when we look at how do you actually figure out what you're going to say? So one of the, I might have said that story before, but my old mentor just threw in PowerPoint slides that in certain decks that I was using when I was flying up to Toronto and presenting up there a lot for the business that was based in Toronto, Montreal. And she would just throw ones in that I'd never seen before. And so the moral of the story was, you don't have to know everything, right? You don't have to know everything intimately. Now, if you're doing a 15-minute presentation, yes, you should pretty well know every bullet that's on the slide and a basic idea of what you're going to say about each. Some of you will feel more comfortable with writing out the entire speech, shall we say, and trying to have those notes with you. I think that's great depending on how long you're speaking for. If you're speaking for 5 or 6 minutes to keep you on track, absolutely. I think if you're doing a longer interactive discussion, you certainly don't want to have too much on paper, because it looks like, even though you know it, it looks like you don't, and you're having to read off a slide, read off your pages. But for comfort, absolutely. If you find that's what's comfortable for you, that's what you need to do. And you can put it on flashcards, which is really helpful as well. You can just have some cards versus a large piece of paper, and main points on one sheet. So when I first started being more free flow, I would have my slides sort of there, the deck in front of me, and I might have 1 bullet per slide written down in my notes, just so I remember that one thing I want them to walk away with that one slide. But again, as the comfort grows, you get more comfortable with that. If it's a topic you know really well, you can probably speak about it nonstop. Sometimes in shorter presentations, you need to be more short, succinct, right? So you need to actually have those main points and just stick to them for time. So you can write out your text. Any other suggestions too, please put in the chat around what you guys do. I end up, for me, it's a practice piece. So if it's something really important and it's short and sweet, which is not my happy place, as you can tell, I can sort of talk about anything. But if it's short and sweet, I'll sort of go through it in my head probably 20, 30 times, no joke, if it's a very short 15-minute. I'll do it in the shower that morning before I go into a conference or wherever I'm speaking. And some of them can be pretty high, intense situations as well. So it makes me know that if I keep going over and over and over it, if I miss 1 out of the 30 points, it really doesn't matter. The majority of things I'll remember. Listen to your audience. So you may not be good at this, okay? Not everyone can do this, especially if they're really stressed out if you're really stressed out about the presentation. If this is a really big one with a really big client, or maybe it's an IBANS conference and there's all your colleagues and people that you know there. Maybe that stresses you out a bit more. I don't know. But notice how they react. And again, not to be self-critical, but just have a sense of, are you going a little bit longer? Do people seem a bit distracted? Don't judge them for it. Okay? Read people in the room as best you can. Don't judge them if they're distracted. because we're human. Guess what? Not everyone's going to pay attention to you nonstop looking in your eyes as you're speaking. Somebody's going to get their phone out. Somebody's going to do this or that. They have their own lives. They have things going on. But if in general you find people are not paying attention as much as they should be, then how can you pivot? So it might be like, hey, I'm going to stop for a second now. I'm going to ask you guys a question. Boom, and ask a question, right, about whatever you're talking about. Or maybe it's a story, and you take a pause. Pauses are very important. You ask a question or you say something, and then you pause, and you hold that pause, like a pregnant pause, I think they call it, and you hold it for a couple seconds. And sometimes people that are distracted will look up and say, what's going on? And you can get them re-engaged. But they actually can be very wonderful in creating emphasis around a story or a moment. And as well, can you bring someone in the room? So is there somebody there that can give you the sign? So, okay, you're losing it, you're going to have to pick up the pace, or you have 5 minutes left, or maybe there's another one around, you got to switch to a story now. You got to switch it up, or you got to pivot, or is this time for a break? Whatever it is, someone who can read the room, can you take them with you? Who's really good at that? Now, questions and answers, a lot of people will say, I'm going to do the presentation, you can ask me questions afterward. Everyone's uniquely different. Certain times it's easier if you're working one-on-one with a client, or if it's with a team, you can do it throughout, right? Ask questions as you go throughout. There's pros and cons of each side, because you could go down rabbit holes. What you have to do is make sure you don't go down rabbit holes with questions and answers that aren't applicable to what you're talking about, especially if it's a team member, your team that you're sitting with. So, before, is it after? Do you ask them in advance? Is there any questions before I start the presentation you want me to make sure I cover? So you can kind of do whichever way you're comfortable with, unless it's dictated to you. If you're sort of like, I just want to get through the information and then I'll answer questions because that's the hard part, that's perfectly fine. I don't think anyone really minds it. As long as it's no more than 20 minutes, most people will make a note of a question or they'll comment on something as well. So that's fine too. But if you find you're not as familiar with the material, I would sort of, you know a little bit about each, you could certainly ask them in advance too. Is there any specific questions you want me to cover? At least then you know where their focus is. What is your call to action? So when you finish, there should be some request. I'd love you to consider. May I ask that you do the following moving forward? Can I ask, that you, when you go back to your office, you let me know, like say it was around coverage or something, who knows what it is. I'm asking you now if you could go and give me that information and I'll absolutely get back to you right away. Or it could be simple, just I'd love you to consider this moving forward. Or is it okay now that if I call you in the next couple of weeks, because I'd love to have a second meeting to see how much you took from this, or what questions you might have, or can I request another meeting now? So whatever the call to action is, there has to be something. You can't just sort of walk away. What was the point? What was the outcome, right? And why do they need to do something? Is it they need to think about something? They need to do something? They need to go back and look at like if they are with another firm, if they're with another brokerage, do they need to look something up and get back to you? Is it okay if I call you next week, and just check on what that information is, whatever it is, right? What are you calling them to do? If it's a team, what can you ask your team, right? Is it divvying out actions to each person, whatever it might be? So what's your call to action? Don't ever forget that one. We're going to get to some situations and the other pieces now in a minute. The last one, this is the one that stresses me out the most. I can honestly say, if you're going to get me stressed, this is the one that completely stresses me out. So I've been to all corners of Newfoundland and Labrador. I've been in Nova Scotia, small towns, doing New Brunswick, not so much, but in Nova Scotia for sure. With regard to technology, I've been in the middle of nowhere. Actually, one was in Nova Scotia, actually, and I was in this one resort, and they didn't have a connector for my laptop that fit. And I didn't know what to do with myself, right? I could talk to anybody, do anything, but when equipment fails, it can be devastating. So always have backups, and I've learned this from experience, whether you have a couple of extra, and I don't do this all the time, and I do forget, but, maybe a few printouts of your slides, just in case people can share. It's all good. If you're like me, you use, as much as you might have things written down, you're using your slides to kind of move through your story or the things you're talking about. So again, make sure you have yourself a copy as well. Is the technology, does it make sense? Like, are you bringing a laptop? Is there a laptop? Do you just bring it on a stick drive if it's a PowerPoint presentation, right? What do you actually need to do? When are you going to do it is another one. If you have choices to do that, never, ever, ever speak after lunch, ever, if you can, whether it's a client or a conference or whatever it is. Always request in the morning or, you know, after the break in the afternoon. It's not ideal, but after lunch, usually it's the worst. Within about 45 minutes, people coming back from lunch, they're pretty well toast. Through lunch usually isn't too bad either. So I've actually said no to conferences because of that. So noise level, what's it going to look like, right? And also, is it confidential, right? So, you know, do you have to make sure your voice is a little lower, right? Is it going to be somewhere public, and is there going to be video? I mean, you have to kind of keep an eye on what the noise level might be. Temperature, for heaven's sakes, I've done this, is terrible. I see at the university, sometimes I'll move the thermometer down a little bit, because guess what? You know, if you're with people for a little while and the temperature's pretty high, you're going to lose their attention much faster. So location, don't underestimate. If you haven't been somewhere and you have to go present there, if you're driving to a client's office and you don't know where it is, maybe you get a trial run, make sure you know where you're going. The worst thing you can do from a stress perspective is not know where you're going or get there and be very surprised about something. I've had people take, for large venues, if I wasn't sure if it was somewhere very small in a small community, I've got them, you know, I remember calling this one guy, said, can you just take me a quick picture of the attachments that you've got, or you know, just show me the room, what it looks like, so I know what to bring. And honestly, you just got to roll with it, right? So I always make sure I have a speaker with me. If I have video, I always make sure I have your markers, little things, logistical things that have bit me, you know where, over the years. So I just want to share that. You guys are probably much better at that than me, but just keep those things in mind. Because don't make the assumption. Don't make any assumptions when it comes to the environment you're in. Scenarios. Okay, let's walk through a few, and I want to get your suggestions on what you think. So now, whether these are applicable to you or not, just go with me. So you're asked to speak at a conference of town managers regarding vehicle or fleet insurance, depending on what you call it, and I guess the size, and you know your world better than me. So these are towns that are the smaller towns. These are not the big cities or even the large towns. These are the smaller towns with probably less than 20 employees. They probably use a lot of contractors, but they have their own equipment. Just go with me on this one. So what would you need to consider? So if you look on the bottom there, you'll see what do you need to consider. So what do you think they would need? What's their knowledge level? How do you start to capture their interest? So just start thinking about your approach, what you put on the slides. Anything that comes to mind, just pop it in the chat. What would you consider doing for a group like that? What would you need to consider? Yes, paper copies of the presentation, absolutely. I think that's great, actually, and I won't obviously get Penny to speak to it, but make an assumption here, Penny, you can tell me if I'm right. Number one, things could go awry and you need them, but number two is, yeah, the takeaways, right? What takeaway can you have for them? Because let's face it, you know, I've worked with many towns, and that's why I put it on there, and they might have, you know, 3 employees in the office at any point in time, right? These are people that are constantly multitasking, and they need to take that information back. It's not going to all get fully absorbed at that time. They're kind of generalists in many ways. Excellent. What else would you consider or think about? Yes, they love the paper. Good point. Yes, they do. They love the paper, and I do too, actually, Penny. It's terrible. I'm sure I've killed a tree in the last year. But yeah, the paper piece and writing on it. Some people like to make sure they have notes. Or if your organization, for example, if your brokerage has paper, make sure you bring paper notepads, right? If you want something with your name on it. Yes, they're very busy. Quick and grab their attention. I love that. Grab their attention and do it quickly. Yeah, this is one where you definitely want 3 nuggets, right? You're in there, and this is a kicker with some of these, right? You're the expert. They're not. So, and when it comes to nerves as well, which we'll talk about in a minute, but when it comes to nerves, you know, I can almost guarantee all of you will know more about this than most of the town managers out there, right? They know the basics, and that's what you're there for, to be their advocate, right? So that's really important. Short, get down and dirty, make sure they have your business card, make sure they have your takeaways. Love it. Yes, contact information on paper. Yes, absolutely. Definitely. Sometimes people will stay afterward and ask questions, which is brilliant. So also make sure you have time. Try not to ever rush away from any time you speak, because there's almost always, if there's a lunch shortly after, or if they're doing a conference, ask to stay. Just ask the conference folks, do you mind if I stay for the next few hours? Because guarantee somebody's going to come up to you and start talking about what you, so I really liked your presentation, or can I ask you a question? And that's golden. That's absolutely golden. Real life examples, absolutely. It could be, and here's the kicker too, sometimes I think with insurance, it's the scare piece, because it's true. Sometimes people don't think about what could happen, because you guys are the experts in risk, whether it's personal lines or commercial lines. You guys are the experts. Having said that, sometimes it's the positives too, right? To make sure in terms of a story, it could be an example. So throw out there, yeah, this is what can happen. If you don't have coverages, or you don't have the right coverages, or have you considered this, or here's some new things coming out you need to consider, but also tell them the good ones from a claims perspective, or from typical things that people have now and what it can help with. What else? Come on, poor Penny's doing all the work here now. Can anyone else have anything else they want to share? What would you ask these people? What would be an ask? What ask could they have? I have an idea if I don't get a note there. Oh yeah, love that. Actually, get rid of insurance jargon. Yes, absolutely. Talk in their language. You want to talk in the language of every client in front of you, or potential client. I'm thinking an ask could be, you all have my business card there. I ask you take it, and any questions at all you have, I'm happy to answer them. Obviously not for half an hour to 45 minutes on the phone, but if anyone has a quick question, or they want to get some clarity around anything, I ask you to call me. I'm not saying that just because I'm here. I'm saying I really would be upset if you had a question, and you really are burning a question or idea that you didn't call me for. So again, it could just be that, right? Oh yeah, so not to submit every Penny's on the ball this morning. Yes, there's definitely things you can tell them not to do too, which is great. All right, so let's go to the next one. So we're going to go commercial client here. So you've got a commercial client who wants you to present on the risk analysis to their board of directors within the financial industry. Some people here this may not be what you do, but just go with me here. So in some financial industry, so it could be, a smaller company, it's a nonprofit, maybe it's a debt reduction company, who knows what it is. So they've got a board of directors, and they want to know about risk. So at a board of directors meeting, what would you consider? What do we know about finance people? Let's put it out there, the finance industry. Any thoughts? Yes, they love their charts and graphs. They love stats. They love statistics. You're guaranteed on every board, you're going to have finance people on a board, let alone within a financial industry. So you've pretty well covered off quite a bit there. Accountants and people like that will love stats as well, just not as much graphs and charts, visuals, as much as you don't want to overwhelm them, because they are a board of directors. You want to have them, yeah, absolutely right. You got to be meticulous. You got to have the data. So you want to make sure you're correct. And somebody may ask you within that type of industry, so where did you get your data from? So make sure you actually quote where it's from, or have it at the ready. If you took it from an article, or you took it from information that you have, ideally have it with you so people can see it. Board of directors, though, are as much as, unless it's a really pivotal piece, and this is all, they don't want it to be too long. You will lose their attention, either because they don't understand it, or because they have to get onto other things as well. Because oftentimes they're in this type of situation, it's probably if it's a nonprofit, as an example, they would be volunteers, right? So short and sweet, just as information, and then let them think and ask questions. Again, do you want to send anything in advance? The downside of sending something in advance to these people is that the stats people will actually potentially try to be critical and pick it apart a little bit. So you just, be careful on that one. All right, so last one, what about your own teams? So you've got a great idea. You mentioned to someone that you really should let the leadership team, or the executive team, or the CEO, or the owner, whoever it is, you should really let them know. Why don't you go in, put something together, and just go in and present it to so-and-so, or to a team. So what would you consider with that? What would you think you'd consider about that team in advance? What else would you consider for them? Yes. So when you know people, you have a significant advantage. There's a downside too, but there's an advantage because you know them. You probably have a sense of what means something to them, what their needs are, and how do you deliver based on that. So if I'm going into a leadership team that I know is struggling in a certain area, and so say this is about increasing. So say client, say it's, I mean, it's a tough market, right? So let's just say numbers are all that's on their mind these days. So if you know you're going in, number one, to present something that you know can help in terms of the numbers, if we do the following, this would help with our efficiencies, which would mean we wouldn't have to do this, which would mean we'd have our client service people could be out more with clients, or our response time would be quicker. It's sort of an easier sell if you know it's top of mind. And also the people themselves, right? Short and sweet, yes. Short and sweet meeting, and coworkers. Who can you talk to? Like, so maybe you're newer to the organization. Maybe you don't know people that well, or what drives somebody, or what are they really about? Because as much as we go in with our role hat on, this is what we do. We are certain types of people, right? That want different things. So if you can actually learn about somebody, what really drives this person? What do they really want? Like, how do they roll? And you can figure that out about 3 or 4 people if you're presenting in front of them. This helps for clients too. Any information you can get is critical so that you have a better sense of what to go in with. If you found out that somebody just became a grandfather or a grandmother, and you go in and you make some comment about, and they're talking about their kid all the time, right? Or their grandkid all the time, right? Maybe you can use that. Maybe you can go in and talk to them in a certain way. Or ask a question before you start. Oh, I heard you're this or whatever. Create that trust, create that connection, meet their needs, short and sweet, you nailed them all, and find out from other people, poll people. Get them to look at the presentation. If you know you're speaking to somebody who knows this person well, look, I was going to put 2 or 3 or 4 slides together, or I was going to hand out this or put these numbers together on just one page. I was going to bring it into Mary. What do you think? Right? Absolutely. Absolutely. And proven results here. What is the tangible takeaway? Because it's a business case, right? What's the tangible takeaway, and how do we make sure that happens? So what are the things that and have it all in your head whether you present to that detail or not, right? You have to have some well thought out plan. Excellent. Thanks, guys. So let's talk for the last little bit around what scares us. So we talked a little bit about last time around what, some people piped up in terms of what they thought scared them. There's actually a phobia, which is probably not surprising to most of you, called glossophobia, which is the fear of public speaking. So it's extraordinarily common, but not from a phobia perspective. So when you actually look at it in terms of, do people get anxious generally for public speaking? Absolutely. 3 out of 4 people probably have what people would consider anxiety over it. Right? So whether they, are to the point of incapacitation. So, 69% actually have a phobia, and it's extraordinarily high, relatively speaking, within the phobias. Sort of that, and even public speakers who do it all the time will say on occasion they'll just get that blank, or something will happen and it will stress them out. So everyone has the capability to do it, but phobia can be quite extreme. And often it's very quiet people. And why do we have it? Why do we have this phobia? So it plays into, which I'll talk about in a second, it plays into the extreme nature of how high your anxiety is. Okay. So as I mentioned before, I'm pretty sure I said, if I go into a session and I haven't got some level of anxiousness, whether it's hope I've got the equipment done right, or hope I've got this, or I hope I've got that, a little bit of energy, adrenaline that kicks in, which makes it the optimal anxiety. That's your peak performance, when it's just enough, but it's not incapacitating you. Okay, so oftentimes it depends on the situation. For example, if I had to go and present to Barack Obama as an example, there's a few people in the world where I'd say I wouldn't even care. I could probably do it in front of a lot of other presidents, but he would probably be one that I would pause and say, wow, he's so incredibly insightful and thoughtful. I don't know how I can possibly connect with this man that would be meaningful to him, as an example. I would probably be coming down the far side of that, so down towards the unhappiness section for a period of time. Hopefully I pulled myself out of it because I do a lot of this type of work. Having said that, you get people who just don't care. And it's like, you know, so if I go in and if I'm sort of relaxed and like, oh yeah, just humdrum, I'm not going to present effectively. Okay. So there's a level of anxiety where we all perform well. The question is what takes it over the top? So when you look at causes of anxiety with regards to public speaking, I mean, we've all talked, I'm sure we'd all have very similar things to say. At the end of the day, the biggest one, well, the unknown, the loss of control because you don't know what's going to happen, but rejection, believe it or not. What if my brand, or what if they think of me differently? What if all of a sudden they don't think I'm an expert anymore? What if they think I'm not capable, right? A sense of rejection is one of the top ones. So, and oftentimes, and it is what it really goes back to is us as humans. We want to be part of a group and we want to be accepted by a group. And that's where it comes to. So whether that means something to you or not, hopefully it'll help a little bit to know why we're feeling the way we feel and why it's so predominant. So we often get then into fight or flight mode, right? So we get into, oh my gosh, I'm going to freak out. And we just start raising up. And sometimes then we go in and we speak too quickly, which is a very common thing because our adrenaline's so high and we're so strung out. Or we speak really quietly, because those are people who are in flight mode, like, ooh, if I'm just quiet, it'll all go away. So again, start thinking about what mode you could go into, and then how do you regulate that, which we'll talk about in a minute. Backup plans. So what's the worst case thing that can happen? How do you deal with that? What's the backup plan if technology goes down? What's the backup plan if I forget to say something? Or, you know, how do you find ways to mitigate the risk, the world you guys live in? So what can happen and how do you mitigate that risk? If we're in a regular level of anxiety, that can happen. Or if we're really high, once we know, okay, technology, I guaranteed it's going to, like when I know there's a tech person there in the room, I said this to the guy at the conference, he was there and I was like, yes, I relaxed now. I totally relaxed. before the conferences, I knew technology was up and at 'em. So I didn't need a backup plan because I knew a person was going to be there. So it was all good. So enthusiasm for the subject is something you really don't care about, and you're the focus of the attention. Now, here's the thing. We think that people are watching us more than we think. So once we start talking and we start going down our path, people are actually listening more to what's going on in their head than they are to actually watching what we're doing. Okay, so if we're talking about an interesting topic, they're processing it in their head, and for example, it happens. I forget what was my train of thought. We all do it. So, you know, if I actually just forget my train of thought mid-sentence and I kind of just stop there and move on to something else, you know, most people won't notice. I will notice. What if I forget about a bullet on a slide and I don't speak to it? Most people won't notice. But guess what? We notice it when we don't need to. Okay, sometimes we get caught up in that, and honestly, nobody really notices. So how do we help with this? Only got a couple of minutes, so I just want to sort of throw this stuff out to think about, because each and every one of you is completely different. Embrace some of the anxiety. So anxiety is good. You need some to perform, okay? So when your stomach's a little bit upset or your palms are a bit sweaty, and maybe you're trying to breathe it out, you know, which I'll mention in a second, but, you know, that's fine. That's fine. It's when it gets over the top, you know, and you know that you're just not even focusing, that it can be a little extreme. In terms of breathing techniques, right? Yoga breathing techniques, I think I've mentioned a few calls before. Go online, look it up. Breathing techniques, there's lots of great ones, and they actually work. These are not just things that people talk about. These actually physically work, right? I mean, there's reasons why, you know, our whole system will relax a bit more, just enough to focus with some of these breathing techniques. Prepare, right? All the things we've talked about in the last two sessions, go over, like, think about it. What are my outcomes? What's this going to be? What's that going to be? Plan. Hopefully you have at least a couple of days to put something together and sort of walk through all these thoughts and ideas around how you can present, how short it should be, how long it should be, the technology, what are my little nuggets, all those things you prepare for. So you're usually the expert. Okay, you are usually no more. I understand when we're all nervous when we think of people know more than us, and sometimes it's our colleagues. If I knew it, like, you know, when I was at an academic conference, that was the scariest for me because they are academic experts and I wasn't. So, but generally, you know your stuff. And even if you didn't know it a week ago, chances are you researched the you know what out of it and you're the expert now to some extent. So you know more than you think. So, you know, chances are very high you'll be able to handle anything that comes your way. And the two ones I want to throw out here lastly, is the worst case scenario, which I personally find helpful, but a lot of people that go over the top in terms of anxiety levels, sometimes you need to actually do what's called positive self-talk. So in other words, oh my God, what's going to happen if I forget what to say, versus, oh, what could happen if they love my presentation and I get a standing ovation? You actually visualize success, right? There's lots of techniques. You can go online if you find you're one of those people that this might be helpful for. Try it out. It doesn't hurt. So I've done both. I do, because I'm more confident now, I just go to the what ifs, because sometimes it's the detail that I lose personally. And you don't have to be perfect. You know, so you miss a slide, or you miss a point on a slide, or so you stumbled through something, or you were quick speaking and then you had to slow down, or maybe you didn't answer the question as well as you should have. No one cares. Really, no one cares, right? They see that you've done an effective job. They are there they actually want you to succeed 99% of the time. The audience wants you to succeed, and they want to just go along for the ride. This is their time too. So there's lots of things to do here. I only hope this has been helpful the last 2 times. We're not obviously doing a session where we can practice and things like that. So if this, let me know what you thought of the session. This is hard to do in webinars, but hopefully there's a few nuggets of information there that you can take away from this. And we'll call it a day, because going over time is not something you want to do on a presentation. Anyway, have a lovely day, you all, and we'll talk to you soon.